What if the end of a royal marriage didn't begin with a fight, but with a whisper of paper sliding against velvet? Not a scream, not a slammed door, not even an argument. Just a note. Folded, hidden, and never meant to be found. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Picture this for a moment. A quiet room. Late afternoon light cutting through tall windows. The kind of stillness that only exists in places where everything is supposed to be perfect. Prince Harry isn't angry. He isn't suspicious. He isn't even looking for answers. He's just standing there. And in that moment, everything changes. Because sometimes the most devastating discoveries don't arrive with drama. They arrive quietly, casually, almost politely. And by the time you realize what you're holding in your hands, it's already too late. Ask yourself this. If you found a note that suggested your entire relationship was built on something you never agreed to, would you want to know the truth? Or would you wish you'd never opened the box at all? This story doesn't begin with divorce lawyers. It doesn't begin with headlines. It doesn't begin with betrayal the way we usually imagine it. It begins with a jewelry box. An object so intimate, so personal, so protected, that opening it feels almost sacred. A place where trust lives. A place where nothing dangerous is supposed to exist. And yet, that's exactly where the danger was hiding. Because what Prince Harry found inside that box wasn't jewelry. It was proof. And before you assume you know what kind of proof we're talking about, slow down. This isn't the kind of story you rush. This is the kind you let sink in. The kind where every detail matters. Every pause matters. Every silence means something. Harry had been uneasy for weeks. Not because of one big argument. Not because of one explosive moment, but because of the quiet. The strange kind of quiet that settles into a marriage when words stop being honest. When conversations feel rehearsed. When smiles arrive half a second too late. You know that feeling, don't you? That subtle shift when the person you love is still there, but something about them feels slightly out of reach. Like you're standing next to them, but somehow you're not standing with them anymore. Harry felt that. He felt it in the pauses. In the way conversations ended before they began. In the way laughter sounded practiced instead of spontaneous. And here's the thing people don't talk about enough. Prince Harry has spent his entire life surrounded by secrets. Palace secrets. Family secrets. Media secrets. He knows what secrecy feels like. He knows how it breathes. He knows how it moves through a room without anyone acknowledging it. So when secrecy entered his marriage, it didn't feel foreign. It felt familiar. That's what made it dangerous. Because familiarity breeds tolerance. And tolerance allows things to sit unchallenged far longer than they should. Now, let's be clear about something. Harry wasn't snooping. He wasn't searching for evidence. He wasn't even suspicious in the way people expect suspicion to look. He was looking for something else entirely. Something small. Something ordinary. Something that didn't matter. And that's when he opened the jewelry box. Think about the symbolism of that for a moment. A jewelry box is supposed to hold beauty, sentiment, memory, gifts given with love, pieces worn during important moments. It's a place where time is stored in gold and stone. Not secrets, not explanations, not contingency plans. Yet there it was, a folded piece of paper tucked beneath items that had been worn to public events, private dinners, moments meant to represent unity. The note didn't announce itself. It didn't scream for attention. It waited, and when Harry picked it up, something in him already knew. Have you ever had that feeling? That strange tightening in your chest before you even understand why? That moment when your instincts speak before your mind catches up? That's what happened here. Before he read a single word, Harry felt the weight of it. The paper wasn't old enough to be meaningless. It wasn't new enough to be recent. It existed in that dangerous middle space where explanations get complicated. He unfolded it slowly. Not because he wanted to drag out the moment, but because something inside him was bracing for impact. And the first line changed everything. Not because it was cruel, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't written for him. Let that sink in. The most devastating words aren't always the harshest ones. Sometimes they're devastating because they reveal who you weren't meant to be. This note wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate, measured, planned. And that's when Harry's hands began to shake. Because love doesn't usually sound like a strategy. Love doesn't usually read like a backup plan. Love doesn't usually include language that assumes outcomes instead of hoping for them. As he read further, His mind began doing something humans do instinctively when confronted with information that doesn't match the story they've been telling themselves. It started connecting dots. Moments that once felt romantic now felt curated. Decisions that once felt spontaneous now felt strategic. Conversations that once felt vulnerable now felt positioned. And here's the part no one prepares you for. It wasn't rage that hit first. It was humiliation. The realization that you may have been the only one in the room who didn't know the full script. That while you were living in the present, someone else had been planning the future with contingencies. Ask yourself honestly, which hurts more? Betrayal, or the realization that you were never fully informed? Harry didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He didn't confront anyone. He stood there, silent. Because silence is what happens when the ground drops out from under you and your body hasn't caught up yet. And in that silence, something darker crept in. Doubt. Not just about Meghan, but about himself. Had he ignored signs? Had he filled in gaps with hope instead of truth? Had he mistaken intensity for intimacy? These questions are brutal. Because once they start, they don't stop. The note referenced a promise. Not directly, not boldly, but clearly enough that there was no misunderstanding. A promise made under circumstances Harry hadn't been part of. A promise that suggested preparation rather than passion. And then there was the date. The date is where everything collapsed. Because dates don't lie. Dates don't soften themselves for your feelings. Dates don't care how much you love someone. The date placed the note at a moment in their relationship that Harry had always believed was pure, untouched, uncomplicated. And suddenly, that moment wasn't pure anymore. It was layered. It was compromised. It was shared with something he never consented to. This is the point where many people would confront immediately. Demand answers. Raise their voice. Force clarity. Harry didn't. And that decision matters more than you might think. Because when someone chooses silence over confrontation, it means they're not looking for reassurance. They're looking for confirmation. Harry placed the note back exactly where he found it. Not because he was afraid, but because he needed to see what would happen next. Would the truth reveal itself without being forced? Would behavior change? Would words slip? And perhaps most importantly, would the person he married realize what had been uncovered? That's the terrifying thing about secrets. They don't just exist on paper. They live in behavior, in tone, in timing. And once you know where to look, you start seeing them everywhere. From that moment on, Harry watched differently. He listened differently. He noticed the pauses, the deflections, the way certain topics were redirected with practiced ease. And slowly, something settled inside him. Not anger, not heartbreak, certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't explode outward, but implodes inward, quietly, decisively. Because once certainty arrives, there's no unseeing it. This wasn't about whether Meghan loved him. This was about whether the foundation of their marriage had ever been as mutual as he believed. And here's the question that changes everything. If someone plans for an ending before a beginning is even complete, were they ever standing in the same place as you? By the time Harry left that room, he hadn't decided anything yet. But something had already ended. Trust doesn't break loudly. It fractures, silently. And once that fracture begins, every step afterward becomes dangerous. Because the next move Harry made wouldn't be emotional. It would be deliberate. And when you realize someone you love has been deliberate in ways you never knew, you start responding in kind. The jewelry box was closed. The note was hidden again. But the marriage? That was already unraveling. And what Harry would do next? The silence he would choose, the question he would ask, the test he would set, would push everything past the point of no return. Because what came after the note wasn't an argument. It was a decision. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What would you do if the moment that broke your marriage didn't explode, but whispered? Because that's how it happened next. Quietly, deliberately, almost politely. After closing the jewelry box, Harry didn't rush. He didn't pace the room. He didn't do any of the things movies tell us men do when their world collapses. He did something far more dangerous. He acted normal. And that's where this story really begins. Because when someone who is usually emotional suddenly becomes calm, you should be terrified. Harry walked out of the room like nothing had happened. Same posture, same expression, same steady pace. If anyone had been watching him in that moment, they would have missed it entirely. But inside him, something had shifted. Not cracked. Shifted. Like a heavy door closing somewhere deep in his chest. Ask yourself something honestly. Have you ever stayed quiet not because you were confused, but because you were suddenly too clear? That was Harry. He didn't need answers yet. He didn't want explanations. He wasn't interested in reassurance. Because reassurance only matters when doubt exists. And doubt was gone. What replaced it was observation. From that moment forward, Harry stopped participating in the marriage the way he used to. He became a witness instead of a partner. And there's nothing more unsettling than realizing the person beside you is watching instead of engaging. At first, the changes were microscopic. A pause before responding. A half-second delay in eye contact. Questions asked without warmth. The kind of changes most people would dismiss as stress, fatigue, or mood. But Harry noticed everything. He noticed how Meghan spoke when she thought she was being reassuring, versus when she thought she was being persuasive. He noticed how her tone shifted depending on the subject. And he noticed something else. The jewelry box was never moved. Think about that. Days passed. Conversations happened. Life continued. And yet, the box stayed exactly where it was. Untouched. Unchecked. As if nothing inside it mattered. As if the note didn't exist. Now ask yourself this. If you knew there was something dangerous hidden in a place you keep close, wouldn't you check? Unless you already knew what was there. That realization hit Harry like ice water. Because silence can be accidental. But neglect? Neglect is intentional. So Harry decided not to force the truth. He decided to let it reveal itself. This is where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. Harry didn't confront Meghan because he didn't want to hear the rehearsed version. He wanted the unguarded one. The truth that slips out when people believe they're safe. When they believe the secret is still hidden. So he waited. And while he waited, he remembered. Moments from the past began resurfacing, not as memories, but as evidence. Things he once brushed aside suddenly demanded attention. Conversations where answers felt a little too polished. Decisions that seemed sudden but now felt premeditated. Advice that always seemed to push him in one direction. Back then, he called it confidence. Now, it felt like control. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Harry has always been emotionally open, reactive, vulnerable. He leads with his heart. That's not a weakness, but it does make you easier to steer. And steering doesn't require force. It requires timing. Harry started replaying key moments. The early intensity, the fast pace, the way his doubts were framed as external pressure instead of internal instinct. Had he been protected or positioned? That question haunted him, but he didn't ask it out loud. Not yet. Instead, he chose a test. A small one, harmless on the surface, deadly underneath. One evening, casually, almost absent-mindedly, Harry brought up a memory. A shared memory. Or so he thought. He mentioned a conversation they'd had early in their relationship. A private one. Emotional. One that he believed had shaped a major decision they made together. He didn't accuse. He didn't probe. He simply referenced it. And then he watched her face. Here's where things get chilling. Meghan didn't react with confusion. She reacted with calculation. A blink too slow. A smile that arrived before understanding. A response that addressed the outcome, but not the memory. Have you ever noticed how people answer questions they wish you'd asked instead of the ones you actually did? Harry noticed. He felt it immediately. That sickening sensation when your instincts start screaming and your brain finally stops telling them to quiet down. So he tried again. Rephrased. Slightly. And this time, her answer contradicted the first. Just enough to matter. Not enough to accuse. But enough to confirm. Harry didn't correct her. He didn't press. He nodded. And that nod sealed it. Because now he knew something else. She didn't realize what he had found. And that meant the truth wasn't just hidden, it was unprotected. This is the moment where many people still try to save the relationship. They negotiate with themselves. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe context changes everything. Maybe love outweighs intention. Harry didn't do that. Why? Because the note wasn't emotional. It wasn't messy. It was strategic. And strategy doesn't disappear with explanation. Strategy means preparation. Preparation means foresight. And foresight means someone was planning for a version of reality Harry didn't agree to. That night, something else happened. Meghan asked him a question. A simple one. Casual. Almost affectionate. Are you okay? Harry looked at her. And for the first time since finding the note, he told the truth. Yes. And that answer unsettled her. Because it wasn't the answer she expected. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't heavy. It was flat, resolved. And that's when the power dynamic shifted. People expect anger. They expect grief. They expect confrontation. What they don't expect is emotional withdrawal. Withdrawal is terrifying because it signals finality. Harry didn't sleep well that night. Not because he was spiraling, but because his mind was reorganizing. You see, when someone realizes their relationship may have been shaped by someone else's plan, the question stops being, do they love me? And becomes, why did they need a plan at all? That question kept him awake. By morning, Harry had made another decision. He wasn't going to argue. One that had supposedly shaped a turning point early in their relationship. The wording mattered, because he didn't reference the note. He didn't reference the jewelry box. He didn't reference the date. He referenced the idea. And for a split second, Meghan didn't respond. That pause was everything. Not confusion. Not surprise. Calculation. You could feel it. The air changed. She smiled, but the smile came too late. She nodded, but the nod didn't match the rhythm of the conversation. And then she answered. Confidently. Too confidently. Here's the thing people don't understand about lies. They're not always false. Sometimes they're incomplete. Her answer was technically plausible, emotionally polished, logically sound, but it wasn't aligned with the note. And alignment is what matters when truth is layered. Harry didn't challenge her. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't say she contradicted herself. He simply listened. And the more she spoke, the clearer it became. She wasn't remembering. She was narrating. Have you ever noticed how people tell stories differently when they're recalling versus when they're defending? Recalling is messy. Defending is structured. Her answer had structure. Beginning, middle, end. A clean arc. Too clean. Harry felt it settle in his chest like a stone. This was confirmation. Not of betrayal in the way people imagine it, but of orchestration. And orchestration changes everything. Because betrayal implies impulse. Orchestration implies design. Harry asked a follow-up. Again, harmless. Again, framed as curiosity. He asked about timing. About when that promise was made. Her response came faster this time. Too fast. As if she'd already rehearsed it. And that was it. That was the moment. Because no one rehearses memories unless they expect them to be questioned. Harry nodded. He didn't frown. He didn't stiffen. He nodded the way people do when they've reached a conclusion. And Meghan felt it. She might not have known why, but she felt the shift. The conversation ended shortly after. Casually. Politely. But the damage was done. Harry retreated inward. Because now he understood the note in a new way. It wasn't just a promise. It was a contingency. A plan for a version of the future where certain conditions weren't met. And that future included him. But not necessarily with him. Let that sink in. It meant someone had anticipated failure. Anticipated fracture. Anticipated fallout. And instead of hoping it wouldn't happen, they prepared for it. That realization hollowed something out inside Harry. Because hope is what binds people together. Preparation for failure pulls them apart. That night, Harry couldn't stop thinking about one line from the note. Not the words themselves. The implication behind them. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. It spoke in terms of outcomes. Options. Next steps. And that's when the irony hit him. The note had been hidden among jewelry. Symbols of love. Commitment. Public presentation. But the note itself wasn't about love at all. It was about control. Harry began to see the entire relationship through a new lens. Moments he once considered intense now felt accelerated. Decisions he thought were mutual now felt guided. Even conflict took on a different shape. Arguments weren't resolved. They were redirected. Harry realized something terrifying. Every time he'd expressed doubt, it had been reframed. As fear. As trauma. As external pressure. Never as instinct. Never as something to be honored. And that's a subtle but devastating form of invalidation. Because when someone reframes your instincts as flaws, they gain authority over your reality. Harry had trusted her framing. He had deferred. He had compromised. And in doing so, he'd slowly handed over agency. That's not love. That's surrender. And surrender feels noble. Until you realize it wasn't mutual, Harry began to feel anger for the first time. Not explosive anger. Not shouting anger. Cold anger. The kind that arrives after clarity. Because clarity strips away excuses. And without excuses, there's nothing left to negotiate. He didn't confront her that night. Or the next. Or the next. Instead, he watched. And the more he watched, the more patterns emerged. Every time he pulled back, she leaned in, not emotionally, but strategically. Every time he went quiet, she filled the space with reassurance, not curiosity. Every time he delayed decisions, she pushed gently, persistently, toward resolution, toward closure, toward outcomes. Harry realized she wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing control over the narrative of losing him. Those are not the same thing. So he decided to test one final thing. Not her memory, not her honesty, her reaction to uncertainty. He told her he needed time, not space. Time. Time to think, time to feel, time to decide. And her response betrayed everything. She didn't ask what he needed. She didn't ask how long. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She asked what this meant. That question landed heavily. Because people who are emotionally invested ask about feelings. People who are outcome-focused ask about implications. Harry answered simply, I don't know yet. And that answer cracked something. You could see it in her eyes. Not fear. Calculation. Because I don't know yet is the one phrase that can't be managed. It can't be spun. It can't be predicted. It introduces chaos. And chaos is the enemy of strategy. That night, Harry slept alone again. But this time, it wasn't just distance. It was preparation. He began imagining a future without the marriage. Not dramatically, not tragically, logistically, emotionally. What would it feel like to wake up without negotiating reality? What would it feel like to trust his instincts again? Those questions didn't frighten him. They steadied him, which is how he knew the marriage was already over. Because when the thought of leaving brings relief instead of panic, the decision has already been made. Harry didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But the sentence was fully formed in his mind. I'm divorcing Meghan. Not as a threat. Not as leverage. As a conclusion. The next step would be the hardest. Not the separation. Not the fallout. The confrontation. Because when Harry finally brought up the note, there would be no space left to maneuver. And he knew exactly when he would do it. Not in anger. Not in conflict. But in calm. Because calm leaves nowhere to hide. And when that moment came, everything would collapse at once. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever noticed how the most final decisions don't announce themselves? They don't arrive with fireworks. They don't come with dramatic speeches. They arrive quietly, and once they do, nothing can stop them. That's where Harry was now. The decision wasn't forming anymore. It had settled. But here's the part people misunderstand. Harry didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel empowered. He didn't even feel angry. He felt calm. And calm, after chaos, is dangerous. Because calm means the storm has already passed. You're just standing in the wreckage deciding what to salvage. Harry didn't rush to confrontation. That wasn't his instinct anymore. He wasn't looking for closure through explanation. He wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to preserve himself. So instead of saying the words out loud, he did something far more telling. He began to emotionally disengage in ways that couldn't be undone. Small choices, subtle shifts, irreversible signals. He stopped sharing his daily frustrations, stopped venting about the past, stopped processing out loud. The emotional tap was turned off. And when that happens in a marriage, the silence becomes unbearable. Meghan felt it. She tried to compensate at first. More affection, more check-ins, more reassurance. But affection without access feels hollow, and reassurance without intimacy feels forced. Harry responded kindly. That kindness was a mistake, because kindness, without vulnerability, creates confusion. She couldn't tell if he was drifting or regrouping. And uncertainty makes people anxious. Anxious people push. So she pushed. Not aggressively. Strategically. She asked about plans, about timelines, about what he needed. Harry gave neutral answers. Non-answers. The kind that don't commit but don't reject. And that was driving her mad. Because Meghan needed something Harry wasn't giving anymore. Clarity. Not emotional clarity. Narrative clarity. She needed to know where she stood. And Harry wasn't going to tell her. Not yet. Because he was watching something else unfold. Meghan began shifting the framing. She talked about everything they'd been through. About outside pressure. About miscommunication. Notice the pattern? The issue was always external. Circumstantial. Environmental. Never internal. Never structural. Never about intent. Harry listened. And with every reframing, his certainty deepened. Because reframing is what you do when the truth doesn't serve you. Harry had stopped asking why. He had started asking how. How had this dynamic been built? How had he been guided instead of partnered? How had love turned into leverage? Those questions didn't require answers from her. They required honesty from himself. And that honesty hurt, because it meant admitting something difficult. He had ignored his instincts. Not once. Repeatedly. And the note, the quiet, folded note hidden under jewelry, had forced him to face that. Not with blame, but with accountability. That's what changed everything. Harry didn't see himself as a victim anymore. He saw himself as someone who had consented to a narrative that wasn't his. And consent can be withdrawn. That realization grounded him. He stopped reacting emotionally to her shifts. He stopped explaining himself when she questioned his distance. An explanation is what she needed, because explanation gives you leverage. Without explanation, there's nothing to manipulate. One evening, Meghan tried something different. She didn't push. She didn't reassure. She didn't frame. She went quiet. And silence, when used strategically, is a test. She wanted to see if he would fill the space, if he would reach, if he would crack. Harry didn't. He sat with the silence, comfortably. And that was the moment she realized something was wrong. Not wrong in the sense of, we need to talk. Wrong in the sense of, I am losing him. You could feel it in the air. The way conversations ended early. The way eye contact lingered too long. The way questions were asked but not followed up. Harry wasn't disengaged. He was disengaging. There's a difference. Disengagement is emotional shutdown. Disengaging is a process, a transition. And Harry was mid-transition. That night, Meghan asked him directly. Not accusing. Not dramatic. Just quiet. Are you thinking about leaving? The room froze. This was it. This was the moment where most people either lie or explode. Harry did neither. He paused, long enough for the question to hang between them. And then he said something that felt like a crack in glass. I'm thinking about what's real. That answer landed hard. Because it wasn't denial. It wasn't reassurance. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a reframing of the entire relationship. Meghan didn't know how to respond to that. You could see it. She tried to redirect, to ground him, to remind him of shared history. But history doesn't override structure. And structure was broken. Harry went to bed that night knowing something irreversible had happened. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No tears, no anger, no fight. Just a realization settling into both of them at the same time. This wasn't about fixing anything anymore. It was about preparing for separation. Harry didn't sleep much, but not because of anxiety. Because of planning. Not legal planning. Emotional planning. He began imagining the conversation that was coming. Not the argument. The revelation. When he would finally mention the note. When he would finally say the words. Not as a threat. Not as leverage. As a statement. And here's the part that shocked even him. He wasn't afraid of her reaction. He was afraid of his own calm. Because calm meant there would be no turning back. By morning, Harry had made one final internal commitment. He would confront her. Soon. Not impulsively. Not explosively. But with precision. And when he did, he wouldn't argue. He wouldn't negotiate. He wouldn't seek understanding. He would state his decision. And walk away. But before that moment came, Meghan would do something she thought would regain control. Something subtle. Something revealing. Something that would make Harry realize just how prepared she really was. And when that happened, the confrontation would become unavoidable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever watched someone sense control slipping and try to grab it back with something that looks like love? Because that's what Meghan did next. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was calculated softness. The shift happened overnight. Suddenly, she was attentive in a way that felt deliberate. Thoughtful gestures appeared where distance had been before. Her voice softened. Her questions sounded gentler. She laughed more easily. She touched his arm just a little longer. On the surface, it looked like reconnection. Underneath, it was containment. Harry felt it immediately, not because it was wrong, but because it was timed. Have you ever noticed how genuine affection doesn't arrive on a schedule? This did. It followed tension too precisely. It arrived too neatly after withdrawal. It was the kind of warmth designed to soothe uncertainty, not deepen intimacy. And that told Harry everything. Because people who sense loss don't always fight it. Sometimes they manage it. Meghan began speaking in we again. Not naturally, deliberately. She referenced shared plans, shared sacrifices, shared narratives. She reminded him of how much they had endured together. And that's where the contradiction became impossible to ignore. She was emphasizing unity, while avoiding accountability. Harry listened. He always listened. But now, he was listening from outside the marriage. And from that distance, patterns become painfully clear. She spoke about loyalty, but never addressed transparency. She spoke about pressure, but never addressed intent. She spoke about love, but never addressed agency. And Harry realized something chilling. She wasn't trying to understand him. She was trying to stabilize him. Those are not the same thing. One morning, she suggested a reset. Not counseling. Not a break. A reset. A symbolic gesture. A fresh start. A way to put things behind them. Harry almost smiled. Because you can't reset something you've finally seen clearly. That's like asking someone to unlearn gravity. He didn't reject the idea. He didn't accept it either. He said something neutral. Let's see. And that answer unsettled her more than a flat no ever could. Because let's see doesn't promise effort. It promises observation. From that moment on, Meghan began overcorrecting. She anticipated his needs before he expressed them. She offered reassurance before he asked. She explained herself before he questioned. An explanation, when unprompted, is revealing. Harry didn't challenge her. He let her talk. And slowly, carefully, something slipped. Not a confession. Not an admission. A detail. She referenced a conversation Harry knew had never included him. A casual mention. Almost throwaway. But it landed like a thunderclap. Because it confirmed what the note had already suggested. There had been discussions, plans, preparations, that existed outside the marriage. Harry didn't react. He nodded. But inside him, something hardened. This wasn't just emotional misalignment. It was operational. The relationship hadn't just been lived. It had been managed. That afternoon, Harry went for a walk alone. Not to cool off. To think. And as he walked, one thought kept circling back. The note wasn't a secret waiting to be discovered. It was insurance. Insurance against uncertainty. Insurance against outcomes that didn't align with expectations. And insurance only exists when you anticipate risk. Harry realized something else then. He hadn't been the risk taker in this marriage. He had been the risk. That understanding reframed everything. Why certain boundaries were pushed. Why speed was encouraged. Why hesitation was reframed as weakness. Risk needs to be minimized. And Harry had been minimized. Not maliciously. Not cruelly. Systematically. That realization stripped away the last traces of doubt. By the time he returned home, he knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to confront her. That night. Not tomorrow. Not later. Tonight. Because the longer he waited, the more space she had to shape the narrative. And he was done living inside someone else's framing. They sat down together after dinner. No tension. No build-up. Just quiet. Harry didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace. He didn't accuse. He said her name. She looked up. And for the first time in weeks, he held her gaze without blinking. I found something, he said. Her body reacted before her face did. A barely perceptible stiffening. A breath held a fraction too long. What do you mean? She asked. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Harry didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch. Because silence invites truth or reveals fear. I found a note, he said. That was it. No elaboration. No accusation. No explanation. Just the fact. And in that moment, everything changed. Because Meghan knew exactly what he was talking about. There was no confusion. No question. No search of memory. Her eyes flickered. Just once. But once was enough. Harry felt something inside him finally settle. This was it. This was the proof he hadn't wanted, but needed. She recovered quickly. Too quickly. She asked where, when, how. All logistical questions. None emotional. And that told him everything he needed to know. Because people confronted with misunderstandings ask why. People confronted with exposure ask logistics. Harry answered simply. In your jewelry box. The room went quiet. Not tense. Empty. As if all the oxygen had been removed. Meghan didn't deny it. She didn't ask what it said. She didn't ask how he felt. She asked something else. How long have you known? And there it was. The confirmation. Not what note. Not you're mistaken. But how long? Harry almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was devastating. He didn't answer her question. He asked one of his own. Who was it for? That question hit harder than any accusation ever could. Because it removed all framing. All explanation. All spin. It demanded one thing, truth. Meghan hesitated. And in that hesitation, the marriage ended. Harry saw it clearly. The pause wasn't about choosing words. It was about choosing damage. Which truth would hurt less? And when someone weighs damage instead of honesty, they've already left the relationship. Harry stood up. Not abruptly. Deliberately. I'm divorcing you, he said. No anger. No tears. No raised voice. Just clarity. The words landed with a finality that couldn't be undone. Meghan stood too. Her face pale. Her face pale. Her control slipping. She tried to speak. Harry held up his hand. No, he said quietly. I'm not asking. That sentence echoed. Because it wasn't cruel. It was resolved. And resolution is terrifying when you've built your power on uncertainty. She tried to reframe. To contextualize. To explain. Harry didn't listen. He picked up the note. Folded it once. Carefully. And placed it on the table between them. This, he said, is why. And for the first time, Meghan looked afraid. Not of losing him. Of being seen. But what happened next? What she said. What she revealed in desperation. Would make Harry realize that the note was only the beginning. And that the truth ran far deeper than he ever imagined. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Chapter 6 complete. Go. What do you do when the truth finally comes out? And it's worse than you imagined? Because that's the moment Harry stepped into next. The room didn't explode after he said the words. I'm divorcing you. There was no shouting. No crying. No slammed doors. Just a long, heavy silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. Meghan didn't chase him. She didn't collapse. She didn't beg. At least not right away. She stood there, staring at the folded note on the table as if it had transformed into something alive. Something dangerous. Something that had finally bitten back. Harry expected anger. He expected denial. What he didn't expect was calculation. You could see it return to her face slowly, like a mask being pulled back into place. Harry, she said quietly, carefully, you're reacting. That word, reacting. As if this was an impulse. As if this was emotional volatility. As if this wasn't the most deliberate decision he'd made in years. Harry didn't respond. And his silence made her nervous. Because silence removes leverage. She took a step toward him. You don't understand what that note is, she continued. You're reading it wrong. There it was. Not denial. Reframing. Harry finally spoke. Then explain it. Simple. Clean. No room to maneuver. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Because explanations require a shared reality. And the reality had shifted. She tried again. It wasn't what you think, she said. It was from a different time. A different context. Harry tilted his head slightly. Who was it for? The question hung there. This time, she didn't answer. Not immediately. She walked to the window instead. Turned her back to him. Bought herself time. And that told Harry everything. Because when someone turns away to answer, they're not looking for clarity. They're looking for escape. Finally, she spoke. It was precautionary. That word landed wrong. Precaution. Like insurance. Like risk management. Like contingency. Harry felt something cold move through him. Against what, he asked. She sighed. Long performative. Against uncertainty, she said. Against things falling apart. Harry almost laughed. Before they even started, he asked. That was the crack. That was where the story she'd been building for years finally splintered. Her voice changed. Sharper. Less controlled. You don't know how much pressure there was, she said. You don't know how fragile everything was. Harry stared at her. No, he said quietly. You don't know how fragile I was. That landed. Because this wasn't about circumstances anymore. It was about consent. She had prepared for an ending without telling him there might be one. She had planned for failure without allowing him to opt out. That wasn't love. That was strategy. And strategy requires a subject. Harry realized something in that moment. She wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing the position she'd built around him. That's why the note existed. That's why it was hidden. That's why it was never meant to be read. Because it wasn't romantic. It was operational. Meghan turned back to him. You're blowing this up, she said. People prepare all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Harry shook his head. No, he said. People prepare when they don't trust the foundation. Silence again. He could see it now. Every piece clicking into place. The urgency. The control. The way his instincts were reframed as weakness. The way hesitation was labeled fear. All of it had served one purpose. Stability. Not emotional stability. Structural stability. Harry felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Grief. Not explosive grief. Quiet grief. For the version of himself who thought intensity was intimacy. Who thought certainty meant love. Who thought surrender was devotion. That version of him was gone. He picked up his jacket. Meghan looked startled. "Where are you going?" she asked. Harry paused. "I'm leaving," he said. "Tonight." Her control snapped. "What?" she said. "No, we're not doing this like that." Harry turned to her. "This is exactly how we're doing it." She stepped toward him again. "We need to talk," she said. "We need to think." Harry met her eyes. "I've done enough thinking," he said. "You've done enough planning." That stung, because it was true. She tried another angle. "What about everything we've built?" she asked. "You're just going to throw it away?" Harry looked at the note on the table. "No," he said. "I'm refusing to live inside it." He left that night. No suitcase. No announcement. Just absence. And absence changes everything. He stayed somewhere else. Alone. For the first time in a long time, the quiet felt honest. No managing tone. No negotiating reality. No pressure to align. Just space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. Harry didn't fall apart. He slept. Deeply. Like his body finally understood it was safe to rest. The next morning, messages came. Carefully worded. Concerned. Measured. Not emotional. Strategic. "I think we should slow this down. You're making a permanent decision over something fixable. We owe it to ourselves to talk this through." Harry read them without reacting, because now he could see the pattern clearly. Every message was about control of the process. Not about accountability. Not about transparency. Not about consent. And that clarity gave him strength. He didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, he reread the note. Again. And again. And this time, something else stood out. A line he hadn't fully processed before. A reference. Subtle. Almost coded. It mentioned something that didn't belong to just the two of them. A third presence. Not explicitly named, but implied. Harry felt a chill. Because this meant the note wasn't written in isolation. It was part of a conversation. And that conversation didn't include him. That realization hit harder than anything else. Because betrayal by one person hurts. But coordination? Coordination changes the entire story. Harry realized something else too. If there was one note, there could be more. And that meant the truth wasn't finished revealing itself. This wasn't the end. It was the opening. He knew then that divorce wasn't just about leaving. It was about reclaiming agency. About pulling himself out of a narrative he didn't author. The next move he made would be quiet. Legal. Unemotional. And irreversible. But before that could happen, before papers were filed, before statements were made, Meghan would make one last attempt. Not through confrontation. Not through emotion. Through exposure. She would reveal something, intentionally or not, that would confirm Harry's worst suspicion. That the note was only one piece of a much larger plan. And when Harry learned who else had been involved, he would realize this marriage didn't just end because of a secret. It ended because of a system. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever realized that the most dangerous secrets don't surface when someone is cornered, but when they believe they still have a chance to win? Because that's when Meghan made her last move. Harry didn't announce where he was staying. He didn't explain his absence. He didn't issue ultimatums. He vanished from the emotional grid. And that's when she reached for something sharper than reassurance. Information. The messages changed tone. At first, they were careful, neutral, almost professional. Then they became familiar, nostalgic, then strategic. She sent reminders, photos, references to moments that had once anchored him emotionally. "Do you remember this? We survived this together. We promised each other." Each message was designed to pull him backward, not toward resolution, toward memory. Because memory is easier to manipulate than reality. Harry didn't respond. And that silence became unbearable for her. You see, when someone has built power through narrative, silence is the one thing they can't fight. Silence doesn't argue. Silence doesn't defend. Silence doesn't explain. Silence exposes. So Meghan did something risky. She reached out through someone else. Not directly. Indirectly. A third voice entered the space. Someone Harry recognized. Someone he trusted. And that's when the pieces began to lock into place. The message wasn't dramatic. It wasn't accusatory. It was framed as concern. I think there's been a misunderstanding, it read. Things were discussed long before emotions complicated them. That line stopped Harry cold. Discussed. Plural. Long before emotions. Which meant before him. Harry stared at the screen. Because no one accidentally admits coordination. That's the kind of thing that slips when you believe your framing is still intact. And in that moment, the note made horrifying sense. It wasn't written in isolation. It was written as part of a dialogue. A larger one. Harry didn't reply immediately. He read the message again. And again. Every word felt deliberate. Carefully neutral. Non-incriminating. But revealing. Because it confirmed his suspicion. The note hadn't been a private thought. It had been documentation. A reminder of agreed terms. Agreed expectations. Agreed contingencies. And Harry had never been part of that agreement. The weight of that realization pressed down on him. Not like grief. Like clarity. Because clarity removes hope. And hope is what keeps people trapped. Harry began replaying earlier moments with new eyes. Conversations that now felt rehearsed. Introductions that suddenly seemed staged. Advice that always aligned with outcomes beneficial to someone else. It wasn't malicious. It was efficient. And efficiency is dangerous when applied to human relationships. Harry felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, but not explosive. Sadness, but not paralyzing. Relief, and that part shocked him. Because for the first time, he wasn't questioning his instincts. They had been right. All along. He had felt steered. He had felt rushed. He had felt managed. And now he knew why. That knowledge hurt. But it also freed him. He responded to the message. Briefly. Carefully. I'm not confused, he wrote. I'm informed. That was all. And it sent shockwaves through the system. Because information changes power. The follow-up came quickly. Too quickly. Clarifications. Explanations. Minimizations. You're reading too much into it. It was about protection. It wasn't personal. Harry didn't respond. Because every explanation confirmed the same thing. They believed this could still be framed. Still be negotiated. Still be contained. They didn't understand something fundamental. Harry wasn't asking for clarity anymore. He had it. And clarity doesn't negotiate. He spent the day alone. Walking. Thinking. Reconstructing his own narrative. Not the one he'd been given. The one he'd lived. And for the first time, he allowed himself to feel something raw. Betrayal. Not just from Meghan. From the process. From the realization that his vulnerability had been used as a variable. Something to be factored in. Adjusted for. Mitigated. That realization was brutal. Because vulnerability is sacred. And when it's treated like a risk to be managed. The damage is permanent. That night, Meghan called. Not texted. Called. Harry almost didn't answer. Almost. But then he realized something. This wasn't about closure. This was about confirmation. He picked up. She didn't start with apologies. She didn't start with anger. She started with strategy. Someone spoke to you, she said. Not a question. A statement. Harry didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. Silence. You're letting other people influence you, she continued. This was always between us. Harry closed his eyes. No, he said calmly. It was never just between us. That sentence shattered the illusion. She inhaled sharply. Harry, she said, you don't understand the bigger picture. That phrase, the bigger picture, the universal language of people who believe their intentions outweigh consent. Harry felt something click. There shouldn't be a bigger picture I'm not in, he said. The line went quiet. And in that quiet, Meghan made a mistake. She spoke without thinking. There were conversations before you were ready, she said. I was protecting the outcome. Protecting the outcome. Not the relationship. Not him. The outcome. Harry felt the last thread snap. Because that was the admission. Not of betrayal. Of philosophy. She believed outcomes justified process. He believed consent mattered. Those two beliefs cannot coexist. Harry ended the call. Not angrily. Not dramatically. He simply said goodbye. And in that moment, something irreversible happened. He no longer felt the need to explain himself. He didn't need validation. He didn't need agreement. He needed distance. The next morning, he took action. Not emotionally. Administratively. He contacted legal counsel. Quietly. Privately. Without spectacle. Because when someone has spent years in a controlled narrative, the most powerful move is silence paired with action. No announcements. No leaks. No statements. Just steps. And each step pulled him further out of the system that had been built around him. Meghan sensed it immediately. The tone of her messages changed again. Now there was urgency. Now there was emotion. Now there was fear. But it was too late. Because fear arrives when control is lost. And control had already slipped away. Harry didn't hate her. That surprised him. He felt something colder. Acceptance. Acceptance that this marriage hadn't ended because of one note. It ended because of a mindset. A belief that people could be positioned instead of partnered. That love could be structured instead of shared. That vulnerability could be leveraged instead of protected. Harry didn't see himself as foolish anymore. He saw himself as someone who had trusted deeply. And trust is never a flaw. But trusting the wrong framework can be fatal. As the days passed, the world outside remained unaware. No headlines. No statements. No visible rupture. But inside, everything had already collapsed. Harry prepared for the next phase. Not revenge. Not exposure. Reconstruction. Of his identity. Of his boundaries. Of his agency. He knew the public narrative would eventually come. It always does. But this time, he wouldn't rush to fill the silence. He wouldn't over-explain. He wouldn't surrender the story. Because the truth didn't need embellishment. It just needed time. And somewhere, quietly, Meghan realized something devastating. The note hadn't destroyed the marriage. Harry's understanding of it had. Because once someone understands the system they were trapped in, they never go back. And the final twist? Harry hadn't even revealed everything yet. There was still one detail from the note. One reference. One name. That he hadn't spoken out loud. Not to her. Not to anyone. Because that revelation wouldn't just end the marriage. It would change how everyone saw the beginning. And when that detail finally surfaced, the story wouldn't be about divorce anymore. It would be about design. Have you ever realized that the most devastating truths aren't the ones people confess, but the ones they assume you'll never connect? Because that's where Harry's mind went next. The name. It sat there in his thoughts like an unfinished sentence. A reference in the note he had skimmed past at first because his emotions were doing too much noise to let logic breathe. Now there was silence. And silence sharpens memory. Harry took the note out again. Carefully. Like it might explode if mishandled. He read it the way investigators read evidence. Not for emotion, but for structure. Every word. Every pause. Every implication. And there it was. Not a name written boldly. Not a signature. A reference. A phrasing that only made sense if the reader already knew who it pointed to. That's when Harry felt something tighten in his chest. Because you don't reference a third party that way unless they're assumed. Assumed to be understood. Assumed to be known. Assumed to be part of the framework. Which meant one thing. This wasn't a secret shared between lovers. It was a system shared between collaborators. Harry leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Have you ever had the moment where a single detail rewrites years of your life? Because this was that moment. The name, implied, not written, linked back to conversations he now remembered differently. Advice that once felt supportive now felt directional. Introductions that felt organic now felt arranged. This wasn't about infidelity. This was about influence. And influence doesn't need romance to be dangerous. It needs access. Harry realized why the note hadn't been destroyed. Why it hadn't been deleted. Why it had been kept. Because it wasn't evidence of guilt. It was documentation of agreement. Agreements don't disappear when emotions change. They get archived. Harry sat there, breathing slowly, feeling the weight of something far larger than a marriage settling onto his shoulders. Because if this was true, then the relationship hadn't evolved naturally. It had been guided, not in every detail, not maliciously, but intentionally. And intention without consent is manipulation. Harry replayed early meetings, early advice, early warnings framed as care. Be careful. Protect yourself. Think long-term. Words that once sounded wise, now sounded prescriptive. Harry had trusted them because they aligned with fear. And fear is persuasive when it wears the mask of protection. He thought about the speed. How everything moved faster than his instincts wanted. How hesitation was reframed as external pressure. How doubt was positioned as trauma rather than intuition. That wasn't love. That was management. And suddenly, the note wasn't shocking. It was consistent. Harry felt anger then. Real anger. Not at Meghan alone, but at himself. For surrendering authorship of his life. That anger didn't explode outward. It focused. Because focused anger becomes resolve. He understood something essential now. This wasn't about leaving a marriage. It was about exiting a structure. And structures don't fall apart because of emotion. They fall apart when someone withdraws compliance. Harry had already done that. Now he needed to finish it. The next step wasn't confrontation. It was confirmation. Not from her. From reality. Harry made a decision. He would verify the implication. Quietly. Indirectly. He wouldn't accuse. He wouldn't ask. He would listen. Because listening had already revealed more than confrontation ever could. Her face pale. Her control slipping. She tried to speak. Harry held up his hand. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not asking." That sentence echoed. Because it wasn't cruel. It was resolved. And resolution is terrifying when you've built your power on uncertainty. She tried to reframe. To contextualize. To explain. Harry didn't listen. He picked up the note. Folded it once. Carefully. And placed it on the table between them. "This," he said, "is why." And for the first time, Meghan looked afraid. Not of losing him. Of being seen. But what happened next? What she said. What she revealed in desperation. Would make Harry realize that the note was only the beginning. And that the truth ran far deeper than he ever imagined. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Chapter 6 complete. Go. What do you do when the truth finally comes out? And it's worse than you imagined? Because that's the moment Harry stepped into next. The room didn't explode after he said the words. "I'm divorcing you." There was no shouting. No crying. No slammed doors. Just a long, heavy silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you start hearing your own heartbeat. Meghan didn't chase him. She didn't collapse. She didn't beg. At least not right away. She stood there, staring at the folded note on the table as if it had transformed into something alive. Something dangerous. Something that had finally bitten back. Harry expected anger. He expected denial. What he didn't expect was calculation. You could see it return to her face slowly, like a mask being pulled back into place. "Harry," she said quietly, carefully, "you're reacting." That word. Reacting. As if this was an impulse. As if this was emotional volatility. As if this wasn't the most deliberate decision he'd made in years. Harry didn't respond. And his silence made her nervous. Because silence removes leverage. She took a step toward him. "You don't understand what that note is," she continued. "You're reading it wrong." There it was. Not denial. Reframing. Harry finally spoke. "Then explain it." Simple. Clean. No room to maneuver. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Because explanations require a shared reality. And the reality had shifted. She tried again. "It wasn't what you think," she said. "It was from a different time. A different context." Harry tilted his head slightly. Who was it for? The question hung there. This time, she didn't answer. Not immediately. She walked to the window instead. Turned her back to him. Bought herself time. And that told Harry everything. Because when someone turns away to answer, they're not looking for clarity. They're looking for escape. Finally, she spoke. It was precautionary. That word landed wrong. Precaution. Like insurance. Like risk management. Like contingency. Harry felt something cold move through him. Against what? He asked. She sighed. Long performative. Against uncertainty, she said. Against things falling apart. Harry almost laughed. Before they even started? He asked. That was the crack. That was where the story she'd been building for years finally splintered. Her voice changed. Sharper. Less controlled. You don't know how much pressure there was, she said. You don't know how fragile everything was. Harry stared at her. No, he said quietly. You don't know how fragile I was. That landed. Because this wasn't about circumstances anymore. It was about consent. She had prepared for an ending without telling him there might be one. She had planned for failure without allowing him to opt out. That wasn't love. That was strategy. And strategy requires a subject. Harry realized something in that moment. She wasn't afraid of losing him. She was afraid of losing the position she'd built around him. That's why the note existed. That's why it was hidden. That's why it was never meant to be read. Because it wasn't romantic. It was operational. Meghan turned back to him. You're blowing this up, she said. People prepare all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Harry shook his head. No, he said. People prepare when they don't trust the foundation. Silence again. He could see it now. Every piece clicking into place. The urgency. The control. The way his instincts were reframed as weakness. The way hesitation was labeled fear. All of it had served one purpose. Stability. Not emotional stability. Structural stability. Harry felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Grief. Not explosive grief. Quiet grief. For the version of himself who thought intensity was intimacy. Who thought certainty meant love. Who thought surrender was devotion. That version of him was gone. He picked up his jacket. Meghan looked startled. "Where are you going?" she asked. Harry paused. "I'm leaving," he said. "Tonight." Her control snapped. "What?" she said. "No. We're not doing this like that." Harry turned to her. "This is exactly how we're doing it." She stepped toward him again. "We need to talk," she said. "We need to think." Harry met her eyes. "I've done enough thinking," he said. "You've done enough planning." That stung. Because it was true. She tried another angle. "What about everything we've built?" she asked. "You're just going to throw it away?" Harry looked at the note on the table. "No," he said. "I'm refusing to live inside it." He left that night. No suitcase. No announcement. Just absence. And absence changes everything. He stayed somewhere else. Alone. For the first time in a long time, the quiet felt honest. No managing tone. No negotiating reality. No pressure to align. Just space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. Harry didn't fall apart. He slept. Deeply.